As we look at the story of Job, often when I say we, I'm talking about pastors, we love to jump on the first part where there's the divine drama happening in the presence of God, and the last part where there's a resolution, and the middle part, the bulk, where Job's friends talk back and forth and it's one long poetic section. We tend to skip over that. And I'm going to be guilty of that this morning because we just don't have time. But maybe next year, the idea was planted in my head, maybe next year we'll come back and we'll go through the book of Job in more detail. But because we're going to just look at the start and the end and leave the middle, that jelly filling in the middle alone this morning, let me just read you this quote from one of the resources I used in preparing for this morning about the purpose of the book of Job. This author said, "The purpose of the book of Job is to show that the proper relationship between God and man is based on the sovereign grace of God and man's response of faith and submissive trust." So the purpose, the reason whoever wrote this book recorded these events for us, is so we will understand that the relationship between God and ourselves is based on his sovereign grace and our response of faith and submissive trust. I really like the faith part. I can easily have faith in God. It gets a little bit more personal when we talk about submissive trust, though. Am I willing to trust when the wheels are falling off my little red wagon, and to do so in a way that is submissive to him because I have faith and because I am convinced of the truth and the reality of his grace, but not just because he's a nice guy grace, but his sovereign grace in that God, creator of heaven and earth, is engaged in my life. And this is the core of wisdom. As we've gone through this series, and we started with wisdom being sourced in a fear of the Lord, understanding who this God is, and the nature of our relationship with him. And we talked about the various dynamics of what fear included, and yet there's the emotive part, but there's also a worship part, and a reverential part, and an honoring part, and the broad scope that single phrase encompasses. And what does it mean to have a fear of the Lord? And we've gone through this series not looking primarily at developing specific skills like 7 effective habits or 7 wisdom habits of highly effective people. We're not doing that kind of approach. This is what do we learn about God and our perception of how he engages with what he has created, and then how we respond to him. Because wisdom is about learning the skill of living righteously. But if we're going to do that, we need to understand what's the standard. Who is this one to whom we're responding? What does it mean for us to live righteously? And all of wisdom keeps driving back to developing an understanding of who God is, especially as I mentioned earlier, God is creator, and God who has revealed himself in this context, in the Old Testament, through the covenant, specifically or most commonly, phraseology and ideas that are sourced in the book of Deuteronomy, but certainly all of the Old Covenant. Now we add to that, because of what Christ has done, his death on the cross, his burial, his resurrection, his ascension. Jesus said to his disciples, "I'm giving you a new covenant." So we do have a greater insight, but it's still that relationship with God. And living righteously, the skill of living righteously is understanding the significance of what it means for God to be creator and for us to be in that covenant relationship with him, now the new covenant, not the old covenant. So let me give a little background to Job and to this story before we look at I'm going to focus most of our attention at the last part of the book of Job, but we need to understand the backstory before we get there. So Job, as you may know, was a righteous man. It says at the very beginning of this story, there was a man who lived in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. So we're talking about a worshiper of Yahweh, a man who had integrity in his heart, who was passionate to do the right thing. And in the ancient world, the mindset was, again, this guy lived more or less around the time of Abraham. I think Job was a historical person. This is not just a made-up drama. He was a real guy. The story is told in the form of a drama, an epic drama. But Job was a real guy who lived and breathed and had these experiences. And he was a man who was exceedingly righteous and committed to honoring God. And because of that, well, maybe not because of that, in the course of that is a better way of saying it, he had accumulated much wealth and a large family. So the assumption was his blessings are because he is righteous. Righteous people are blessed by God. So it's not a big leap and a jump to be able to say, therefore, unrighteous people are not blessed by God, and therefore, if I cannot observe blessing in your life, you must be an unrighteous person. That's how the thinking went. Not true thinking, not right thinking, but that's how the thinking went. And part of the purpose of Job is to correct that misunderstanding, part of the purpose of the book. So in verse 6, then, we have this drama, and whatever's happening here, we have to be careful to not extend this beyond what it's intended to do. It's intended to give us a background of behind the scenes. Verse 6 says, "Now there came a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also was among them." We'll deal with the whole Satan spiritual warfare thing maybe next year. I keep saying that. It's because, next year. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it." Now, whatever thinking you may have about how Satan engages with God's creation and how Satan relates to God and whatever the nature of that relationship is, set that aside for a moment and just consider this phrase, "Where have you been?" And Satan's response was, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." This drama is going to take place in God's created time and space on the earth, the same piece of dirt we're standing and sitting on this morning. This is not something happening up there in the spiritual realms where you've got, these swords drawn between angels and they're going into a big clash of some sort in a mystical event. This is happening in our reality, going to and fro on the earth. And it's an important detail in the backstory, because when God confronts Job, everything God says is about the earth. And that's why, as I sent out the emails this week, I called this "Embrace the Earth." It'll make more sense at the end. So Satan's research takes him around. He observes the hand of God, that he has created this world. He already knows that because of Adam and Eve. And he observes Job, a very righteous man, and he brings an accusation against Job. Of course Job's a good guy. Look at all the stuff you've given him. But if you take that stuff away, he will curse you. And God says, no, I don't think so. But the important part of this drama is to understand the stage where it is happening. The stage is the earth. This world created by God, as we saw in Psalm 24, that he has created it and all it contains. And within this stage, there is a theater. And that theater is the life of Job, in which an amazing drama is about to play out, which is not so much about the person Job, although he is the vehicle or the instrument that helps us understand more about the nature of our God. It is about God himself. And who is this one that Job worshiped so faithfully? So there are three parts to what we're going to look at this morning. Just like in a drama, you'd have scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. Part 1 is the creative acts of God. Part 2 is the character of God. And part 3 is the confession of Job. So let's take a look at these three parts. The first one, the creative acts of God, it's in chapter 38. And for the sake of brevity, we're not going to read the entire thing, just the first 7 verses or so. And the presupposition behind this is this question. Can you do these things, Job? And by extension, can Satan do these things? It's a rhetorical question, and I'm going to do a what do you call it when someone gives away the ending of a movie or a plot? A spoiler, thank you. A spoiler alert here. A rhetorical question. Can you do these things? No, you can't. But neither can Satan. Let's keep the perspective here that this is about Almighty God. So verse 1 of chapter 38. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, and these are phenomenally humbling words if we truly understand them. Who is this that darkens my counsel by words without knowledge? Referring to both Job and his friends. Dress for action like a man. To put it into a colloquial phrase, man up. Who is this that darkens my words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. So Job, you think you're so smart? Answer the following questions. And we've probably all had that moment in school when we were supposed to do some homework and read a section and be prepared to answer questions. And we didn't because we were playing road hockey. Not that this ever happened to me. And you go to school the next day and you are in terror that Mrs. Bulmer is going to call you, and you do everything you can to make yourself as small as possible, hoping that she will choose somebody else. And through that magical power that all teachers have, her eyes zoom in on your heart, and she knows you didn't do your homework, and she says, Graham, and you die 1,000 deaths. Well, that's what's happening here. God is saying to Job, have you done your homework? Do you know what's going on? Let me ask you some questions. Prepare yourself. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Were you there when I, in my infinite wisdom, is the assumption, created all of the heavens and the earth? And the rhetorical question has a very obvious answer. The answer is no. So then Job and friends, how dare you presume to speak for me? Because the friends were saying, Job, clearly what's happening in your life is happening because you have offended God somehow. And God's saying, no, that's not it at all. The creative acts that are referenced by God in chapter 38, let me just go through because we're not going to read the whole thing, but basically it kind of follows the order of creation from the Genesis story. Not exactly, but all the elements are more or less there. It talks about the waters of the earth and the sea, talks about clouds, talks about creating morning and evening, the sunlight and the darkness, talks about death. Although God did not create that, that's part of the creation story when Adam and Eve rebelled against God. Talks about the storehouses of snow. We know about that this week. About rain, about grasslands, about ice and cold, about star constellations, about lightning, about animals and birds. And the whole point is that God has done all of these things that are beyond the ability of humans. So if that is true, then what else can God and is God doing? The creative acts of God. Can you do these things? No, but neither can anyone else. And Job did not have the privilege of the behind-the-scenes knowledge that we have as we read this story. Job does not know that somehow a conversation has taken place between Satan and God, and Satan has asked for permission to put Job through a tough time. He doesn't know any of that. All he knows is that God, as the creator, is the one who has done greater things than Job could ever imagine. We can't even accurately predict the weather. more than maybe 48 hours in advance. That's how limited we are. So, can you do these things? That's part one of this drama, this rhetorical question. Can you do these things? But God doesn't just end there with, look at me, I'm superior to you. He asks a second question. Can you care for these things? It's not just enough that I can demonstrate my authority and my power, but can you care for these things? And the answer, again, rhetorically, is no. You cannot care for these things. Chapter 40, first 9 verses. The Lord said to Job, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it." Then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further." Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? Have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his?" In other words, Job, you recognize I made all this. Can you care for it like I can care for it? And the rhetorical answer, of course, is no. And the implication is, nor can Satan, because he's kind of in the background in all of this. Only God can do these things. He created it. He cares for it. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. Not simply in the sense that he's got ownership, but he's actively managing and caring and guarding and loving what he has created. And as Job goes through this process of experiencing unfathomable sorrow, losing his health, losing his wealth, losing his family, losing everything, and even his support network. His wife says to him, just give up. Curse God and die. It's not worth it. And Job refuses to embrace that. His friends theoretically come to comfort him and fill him full of bad theology that Job, surely this is your fault somehow. It's okay, Job. We're friends here. You can trust us. Just whisper in my ear, what's the bad thing you've done? You don't have to tell anybody else, just tell me. And they assume that this is Job's fault somehow. And in confronting Job, God says, no, you need to think about two things. I am the creator and I am the caregiver. Can anything else create? Can anything else care? And wisdom is sourced in understanding this part of God's character, that the reality in which we live, even when it is painful beyond explanation, when we've made all the right inputs and we're getting all the wrong, by our standard, outputs, not what we wanted, not what we expected, it is still under the sovereign grace of God because he is the creator and he is the caregiver. So wisdom says, I transform my perspective about living on the earth, about embracing the earth, because I realize there is a God above. I am on earth, let my words be few. We saw that a couple of weeks ago from Ecclesiastes 5. And then part 3 of this drama is Job's own confession, starting in chapter 42. Then Job answered the Lord and said, and the fact that whoever wrote this even includes that little introductory phrase, to me, is an amazing demonstration of God's grace. Because if God came to me and said, Graham, and gave me this lecture, I am the creator, look at all the things I've done, I've created all these things. Now consider the ostrich. I created the ostrich. She doesn't even know how to care for her young. She lays an egg and runs away and might even trample on her own eggs. But I am your caregiver. And then there's an opportunity for Job to respond, and he says, Job answered the Lord, answered Yahweh, the covenant God, and said that God would be patient to listen to him. That Job would have the courage because he somehow knew that God would listen to him, that this interaction was even possible. And this is how we know that this text was, even though the story took place probably about the time of Abraham, is part of wisdom literature that existed in that body of literature around the time of Solomon, because verse 1 says, Job answered the Lord. You'll notice in your translations, the word Lord is all in caps. Yahweh, the covenant God, the name of the God, the I am that appeared to Moses. Job answered to the faithful covenant God and said, I know you can do all things, and no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Quoting God, therefore I have uttered what I did not understand. God, I have come to realize I can't explain you. I cannot assign my meaning to your actions, and nor can anybody else. Things too wonderful for me to know. Wait a minute, Job. Wonderful? Losing your health? Losing your wealth? Losing your family? Yeah, those things are wonderful. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about this slow process, and we don't know how much time this story covers. Was this a month? 6 months? Who knows? But in that process, Job is beginning to understand that the Creator God is also the caregiving God. And a wise response, a righteous response to his suffering is simply what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. He is God, and I am not. Things too wonderful me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. And Job is saying, I've come to know and understand more of who you are. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. It's not repentance in the sense that I have sinned and I'm confessing my sin. Or despising myself like I have some kind of self-loathing. But rather in contrast, now that I understand who you are, God, or better understand, none of us will fully understand. I think even when we see Jesus face to face, and when we are in literally the presence of the Creator God, we will still spend all of eternity trying to understand and to fathom the amazing nature and character of our God. But what he's focused on here, his point is, I have now a more honest understanding of who I am. And the idea of repent is not, oh, I'm ashamed of my sin and I'm not going to do that anymore. But repentance has a positive element to it, that I am going to embrace this new thing. I am going to no longer be presumptive in my view of God, but I am going to embrace these new things that I have learned about God. And I'm going to do it in an expression of humility. That's the point of dust and ashes. Not that, I've got the secret. I'm going to write my book, and I'll get published in dozens of languages all around the world, and I can retire happily. It's not that kind of insight that the dime dropped and now I can explain it to everybody else, but rather now that I have learned this new perspective on who God is, the creator and the caregiver, I'm going to embrace that truth with great humility. So what's the wisdom skill we learned from the book of Job? And the theology here goes way beyond what we can touch this morning. Why do righteous people suffer? Or as Rabbi Kushner wrote, why do bad things happen to good people? And we could flip that and say, why do good things happen to bad people? The problem of evil in the world, theodicy, theologians call it. How do we understand that? The book of Job does bring us great insight on that. We'll leave those studies for another day. But the core of answering that question, not to be superficial about it, because the grief is real, the pain is real, the loss is real. We can't just sweep that away and say, trust and obey, for there's no other way. And you might not be happy, but you can be joyful. No, let's avoid those kinds of cliches. It's not about that. It is about, in those moments of sorrow, having the confidence that God is still the creator, therefore has authority over all things, therefore is exercising his sovereign grace. And his only ask is that we respond to him with faith and trust, submissive trust. So the wisdom skill here, I've called it embrace the earth. As we look at the creation around us, embrace it since God is the creator. I hope someday I get a chance to teach a course in pastoral theology. I would love to be able to do that. I got some really wacky ideas I would love to throw out there to challenge people who want to go into pastoral ministry and hopefully discourage most of them, because it takes it takes a unique personality, as you know, to go through and to do this thing and to do it well. You got to be a little bit weird. One of the things I would ask people to do who took my pastoral theology course was to buy a plant. And it can't be a succulent and it can't be a cactus. We don't want to portray church members as cacti. It has to be like, I don't know, some kind of a normal house plant. And one of the responsibilities, if you're going to take my course in pastoral theology, is to nurture that plant and to present to me on the last day of class. The first day, you show me your little plant, and the last day of class, show me a thriving, healthy plant. And the whole point is understanding, caring for people the way God does. It's rooted in the agrarian, the agricultural images of the ancient world. And if we can't learn and research about what is this plant and what kind of food does it need and how do I care for it and what kind of light and have that kind of diligence in caring for a plant and nurturing it. And I realize not everyone's a green thumb. I'm not. I kill almost everything. It's amazing we have children. That's Sharon's influence. But the point is to understand the essence of caring for something in terms of God's created fingerprints. You know, this is his plant ultimately. To change our thinking a little bit from church just being a resource that we manage, a Christian business, a corporation that we grow, to a body that is an organism that is growing. So that would be a component of my teaching in pastoral theology. And I would let the kids believe that unless the plant's growing, they're not passing the course. Now, I'd be more gracious than that at the end. But you'd keep up that pressure on them. And that's exactly what God is doing to Job here. He's reminding, using these very graphic, very earthy images about the nature of his care for his creation. And since Job is a part of that creation, the way that God is caring for him. The proper relationship, let me just read this quote again, between God and his image bearers, us, is based solely on the sovereign grace of God and our responsive faith and submissive trust. In the elemental things of the earth, of the world as God has created it, we do see his fingerprints. His DNA is everywhere. In lightning, a single bolt of lightning that lasts 30 microseconds can power 12 million 60-watt bulbs for an entire day. Wouldn't it be cool if we could harness that? But we can't. It's too powerful. Blizzards, we've all had experience with that, and how just a bunch of flakes of snow that are so pretty under a microscope. You get too many of them together and it can shut down an entire city. A rogue wave can take the largest boat and put it at the bottom of the ocean. A constellation and the night sky has been observed for tens of thousands of years and has the same precision today that we can predict when solar events are going to happen, or celestial events are going to happen thousands of years into the future. And in fact, we know that we have to have leap years every once in a while because there's a wonkiness with them. I don't know, it's something weird, but we have to have a leap year, and we know that by the constellations. Animal behavior. You just look at the way animals act, and how can you say that this is there's not a creator caring for all this. Embrace the earth because the DNA is there. And as we see God's creation and we observe God's creation, we can see not only his creative handiwork, but also his ongoing providential care. Anybody see the sunrise? What morning was that, Sharon? Friday morning? Unbelievable tones of red and orange as I was dropping Sharon off at school. Unbelievable. I was driving home from the school to our place is facing east. And I kept saying to myself, wow, wow, wow. Just because for about 2 minutes, the sky exploded into thousands of colors of orange and red. And it just makes you weak in the knees. This is not only the God who created it, he cares for it, including me. So how do we become wise? Well, I'm going to quote another ancient scholar who has this advice. Forgive me if I can't read it all the way through. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth gives way, and though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. We live in the presence of God, the creator and the caregiver, and we can embrace his creation as reminders of his faithful, sovereign grace and all he asks as a response of faith and submissive trust. Even though the nations may rage, he just lifts his voice and the earth melts because he alone is God. Another commentator said it this way, and I'm going to quote him. I don't normally do a lot of quoting, but these guys had it nailed better than I could say it. What cannot be comprehended through reason, this is Job. What cannot be comprehended through reason, when it makes no sense, must be embraced in love. The book of Job probes us to ask ourselves, do I believe in God? Do I reverently and obediently fear him with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? Do I love him? And that's the message of Job. To embrace the earth, not because it is the source of all things, but it is a revelation of the source, the Creator God, who's creator and caregiver. And all he asks of us is that we love him and we learn how to trust him, because he alone is God and there is no other.